What's up, everyone? This is BigPowner, and today I'm going to be going over the ArchMage build. And my final decision, my first video, my welcome back video, was 2 days ago. Unfortunately, I was going to cover the build and go over the patch notes right after it came out. Then it didn't come out till I was asleep, and then yesterday I kept on having power outages, so I wasn't able to consistently stay on my computer to actually cover the stuff. I have been over all of it. This video today is specifically going to be covering the ArchMage. Is it still viable? Am I still going to be playing an ArchMage build as my first build, my starter build? So let's dive into it. There's a lot of stuff that looks bad if you're looking at it, like the changes, they don't look positive if you're planning on playing the Archmage build. So the biggest changes to the Archmage build are nerfs. There's both skill nerfs. There's both skill nerfs, like the actual skill gem has been debuffed. We already knew this. It's taken about 1/6 of a debuff in the previous notes. I already covered this. They said that they were going to buff it, so we'll go ahead and look at whether it has in fact been buffed. The other thing is there's changes coming to the most popular items that were used with the um, with the Archmage build. Super powerful items. The ones that I was using, the Fevered Mines, and then we also have the Void Bringers. Those are probably the two most popular ones. Both those items have changed. And then the ascendancy of my choice was also getting a change. So we're going to go ahead and cover all of that stuff, and then I'll let you know what my conclusion is on all this. So for starters, we have the patch notes really big, so there's going to be a couple seconds in between me checking all this stuff. Let me go ahead and bring this up. Okay, so here we have the patch notes. I don't know why it moved that when I opened it. Yeah, for like some reason it like scrolled in one of the directions. Where did it go? Oh, it might have been just below. Okay, well first we're gonna look at the ascendancy change right here because I'm already here. So we have the Hierophant. The ascendancy has changed. Sign of Purpose. This was actually one of the ascendancies that I was selecting and still plan to select. So now it causes brands to have 100% more activation frequency in the final 25% of their attachment duration. To give you an idea of what this is really saying, we can look at this as a 25% increase to damage, like an actual 25% increase to damage. The reason why is the activation frequency. You can think about it like this. If it activates, does damage every 0.5 seconds, that means it's 2 attacks every second. So if it's increased by 100% of that, that would mean it's activating 4 times every second. So it's basically just doubling the damage, but since it's only happening in the last 25%, we can just cut that doubling by a quarter. The total damage of the brand is going to be increased by 25%. So that's good. That's a 25% actual increase to damage, more damage at on the end of it. That's good. So the other thing it has is it causes brand recall to have 100% increased cooldown recovery speed. So let's go ahead and look at this real quick. So our ascendancy, what were we losing? We're losing the can cast an additional brand. Enemies take 10% increased damage for each brand that's attached to them. Realistically, you're basically gaining 15% more damage by having the activation frequency and it works on everything. What I'm talking about is in best case scenario, the trade here, this is giving us 10% more damage with any brand outside of the Frost brand that's being added. That has a base of 2, so with one more being allowed to be attached through the Runebringer, you would be able to have 3. So you're losing 10% only for targets that 2 are actually attached to, for something that's going to be adding 25% total damage over time. So that's better. The cooldown recovery speed on this one is 30%, so we could look at it. It's definitely gotten stronger. A lot more cooldown recovery speed, a lot more damage, over double the damage. What we're losing is you can cast initial brand and increase attachment range. There's a lot of attachment range, and since the build is going to be different, which you'll understand why I'm saying that, having as many brands as we had before isn't going to necessarily be as important. Why is that? Because the brands are going to be expiring quicker. This is something that's happening to all brands. They're not going to have as long of attachment times. In the specific case of the Storm brand, it used to have a 10-second time, and that time is no longer being refreshed. So on top of it no longer being refreshed, it's also been cut down by 40%, so they only last for 6 seconds. So having 6 brands or more is not going to be um, necessarily as important, because we're going to be recasting. That being said, though, with the changes that have come, we're going to wind up with a build where our brands are. We're still going to try to get the cost up very high, but no one is going to be building a brand build where their brand is costing them 8,000 mana or 5,000 mana. First of all, I don't think that. First of all, it won't be worthwhile to invest that heavily, because the mechanisms that we have to increase costs are not as easy as like simply adding a bunch of fevered minds, which increase it by 50%. We are only going to be allowed to use one fevered mind, which then is going to be granting those bonuses for each notable passive in range that is allocated. So we're not going to be able to hit as high of percentage increases. Just plain and simple, we're not. The bright side is there's a lot of stuff being added that's going to give us other ways, and there was actually other ways for us to have actually scaled this build if we weren't just solely focusing on scaling the mana cost. I could have invested into things like crit multiplier for spells, crit chance for spells. I didn't go for this stuff because it just wasn't needed, because I was scaling it in a different way. So the build's going to look really different. I'm just going to say that right out in front. If you're making ArchMage build, it's not going to look. It's not. There will be a lot of things that are going to look the same, but it's going to look very, very different. Just out of sheer necessity, we're going to probably wind up having different clusters. Some of the clusters are still going to be really good, but things that we were looking for, like cast an additional brand in multiple spots, grand design, and remarkable, you know, those might not be top priorities anymore. Like if I need more damage, they're adding in clusters that are going to let us increase mana cost. So those might wind up taking more priority, things like that. Or, for instance, like here, I might be like, I might not want as much penetration, so I might wind up going for, even more mana. Because if I can't scale the cost as much, increasing my mana even more is, still another way to add more damage. So I might wind up with something like 2 scintillating ideas. The other thing is I might even go for, a third cluster so that I can fit in more of those things that I need, because what is it that I, am now not needing? I don't absolutely need 6 of like every single jewel slot that I can possibly get. If I remove all these jewel slots, there's going to be other stuff that's going to be going into those slots. Like I said, the build is going to look very different because our access to gear and our choices are going to be really different this league. So but is it worth it? That's kind of the question we're answering. But we will be covering all of these changes. So let me go ahead and pull this back up. And I have to select it. I can't see it right now. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Let's widen this back up. So we're not interested in any of that. Okay, so here's our ArchMage. So this is what I was talking about. You're losing about a sixth of the actual power of the support. It's going from damage equal to 70% of the cost at level 1, unchanged, up to 108% at level 20, which is down from 127. So that is, about a 1/6 change. It's actually less than 1/6 because 20% 20 times. It's taking 20% off, or 1%, 19% off of 127. I'm just rounding it just to make it, um, make it kind of factor pretty easily. 1/6 would be, a little bit less than, would be a little bit more than 20 something percent, which it's actually 1% less. So less than a 1/6 debuff, which, I'm gonna be realistic. The skill gem is extremely overpowered, and I'm gonna go ahead and give you an example of just how overpowered this support is. Um, so let me go ahead and open this back up. All right, so I've taken everything out of my build that has been removed, changed, or nerfed, and my build is unchanged from how it was before. To give you an idea of how powerful the ArchMage support is, we have average display damage of 8,170. When I add the ArchMage support, I have 21,153. That is over 3 times more display damage than I had without that support. How big of a buff is this? So to give you an idea of how big of a buff this actually is, like in the grand scheme of things, in general, the most that supports tend to add, like, is usually like in the 30 to 40 range. Like that's normally a really good support if it increases your skill by 30 to 40%. This is adding over 300% more damage that's displayed on the skill. And that's something that you can just see. That's how powerful it is. I have, 6 empty slots, and my build is, this is my build that I was using with all this stuff in there. It's designed to work with the stuff that I've taken off of it, and it doesn't have anything replacing it. You know, with my build set up like this, all this stuff that was buffing up my ArchMage, my brands are still over 1,000,000 DPS each. That's, pretty significant. So let me pull this back up. We've got a few other things to go ahead and cover on as far as the ArchMage build. So the items that we were looking at, those are going to be completely changed. There's a lot of items. I know what they do. So as far as the Fevered Mind, if I can find them, I'll point them out. As far as the Fevered Mind, you're only going to be allowed one. And as I said, it's going to give you buffs based on, in a small radius, passives that you've allocated. You're going to gain 10% increased mana cost, 20% increased spell damage. It's still going to be good if you're playing an ArchMage build, but it's not going to be 50% increased mana cost and 40 up to 40 spell damage for every single one. It's going to be easier for you to get more spell damage out of it because if you get 3 notables, you're going to have 30% increased cost and 60% increased spell damage. It's a really strong option. It's going to have we're going to have to find a really good spot for it, where we can actually take advantage of that, and it's not going to wind up just being a ton of points that wind up being not really worth it. It will be a strong choice in the build. The nice thing about this is, if you are planning on playing this build, going for this build, you're only going to need one, which, honestly, the way that it looks like these changes are coming, not a lot of people are going to be playing this build. Because just looking at it and not understanding what the changes are actually meaning, and knowing being able to break down and know whether it's worthwhile to play, most people are just going to simply be like, yeah, I'm not going to play that, because it looks bad. So Voidbringers are another one that's going to be changing. The Voidbringers, these are now going to be Legacy. It's no longer going to be a 40 to 80% increased cost to mana skills. It is going to increase the cost of the skill by 40 to 80 mana. That's going to be the change. This is still going to be a really good buff, and it's actually going to be really strong early league if you're able to get Voidbringers if you're playing this. I mean, you can use these at level 55. They still give a massive increase for critical strike chance for spells, which if you are going to be playing this, you're going to want to be scaling up your damage. And, you know, one of the buffs that have come for the brand build is that they have increased its base critical, which is kind of funny because in their patch notes they said that they were making changes so that the endgame builds didn't have to be, you know, crit multiplier based, which that really doesn't make sense to me because crit multiplier, it's a multiplier. Every endgame build, you know, the multiplier is going to be the best choice. This is not just in Path of Exile. Any game that functions this way, it's something that you go for in an endgame build, unless you have a situation where something like ArchMage makes that flat added damage so high that there's no point, there's no need for going for more damage, which, you know, they're nerfing the skill down, so that's no longer possible. So that is, you know, the the path to gain the most damage because it's a multiplier. You know, if you have a 100% multiplier and you get 100% critical, you've doubled your damage. At a certain point, there's breaking points for every type of damage. This isn't just for Path of Exile. This is every single game like this. Whether, you know, it was you know, Diablo in the past, or, you know, Torchlight, any game that plays like this, you know, even the Fortnite Save the World, they all do the same thing. The only times that stuff doesn't work like that is when they have other things in the game that don't have diminishing returns. It's not a matter which those are like the super attack speed builds where like attack speed isn't capped. That's the other one that historically has been really good, but they wind up having issues if they don't cap attack speed because they wind up with these builds that, you know, are just like so ridiculous, like moving that you know, as the game progresses, the builds wind up just looking funny because they're just like they're just like a twitching blob on your screen, which, you know, a lot of you know, games have tried to get away from that. So I I don't know why they even bothered saying that. It doesn't make sense to me, and it's clearly not what they're doing because, you know, you can look through these patch notes and you can see that they've buffed the base crits on tons of the new builds for the weapons that go along with the builds that they want us to play this league. So I don't really get that statement that they made. Maybe that was just, I don't know, a brain fart or something. But these are still going to be really strong. I wasn't even actually using these in my build. And why was that? Because I had already been able to get a nice balance of increased cost to get my damage so high that I had no need for damage anymore. And this, because of the increase to mana, base mana, at the level of increased cost, this was actually better damage, having like really well rolled gloves versus the Voidbringers. So in the new build, for the next league, this is going to be a good choice because we're going to need more additions to add damage. And to give you an idea, up to 80 mana, because it's no longer going to be percentage increased mana cost. It's going to give a flat increase, 40 to 80 mana. To give you an idea, with all of the links in, the mana cost without the ArchMage is 33, so that is a pretty significant addition to the mana cost of the skill. The biggest increase to the mana cost that we're seeing, because, you know, as you can see, I'm at 762, so even with the ArchMage in, this is going to be over a 10% increase to the base part of the mana before we start adding in something like the new Fevered Mind, or we add in something like the new Cluster Jewels that are going to be giving us access to increase mana cost. And to give a quick explanation, as you might be like, man, it seems unfair that they're taking away all of these items that increase mana cost. You have to understand, ArchMage is a new support that's nothing like anything that's ever been in the game. For something like the Fevered Mind, you were kind of paying, you know, the increased mana cost was supposed to be a downside. It was, you know, you were getting 40% increased spell damage for a single jewel slot, which by itself was good. And, you know, the downside to that, getting that, you know, 40% spell damage in a slot, was the 50% increased cost of mana. Kind of same thing with this. You're getting massive increased critical strike chance for spells. you're getting +1 to the level of socketed elemental gems, which, you might be like, oh, well, that doesn't, really seem that good. Well, you can socket in, things like, well, not really necessarily in the low life, but you could socket in things that are other elemental, which is like any elemental type spell, and you can get the bonuses to that. At the very least, I mean, you could throw in, your flame dash, or you could do your wave of conviction. Those things would be getting higher levels. The orbs of storm, if you went that direction, there were changes to the orb of storm. But the point is any elemental type thing, you're gonna get a +1 on that. Um, so, these aren't going to be as strong as they were before, because, 80% total increase to the mana cost is going to be better than a flat 80 in an end game build. Early game, though, that flat 80 mana could wind up being a better thing. And, if we have ways to increase mana cost enough, the flat base addition is going to get multiplied and increased by those. So it could wind up being something that's not too bad of a change. It's going to still be a strong choice for the build. And since they've taken away our ability to use a bunch of these, and we're only going to have so many points for clusters, like I said, it's possible that in the new build I might wind up going for 3 sets of clusters. Because if I trade a bunch of points that were going for stuff like this, I could feasibly do that. So we're gonna have to we're gonna have to see on that, if that's the direction that I wind up going, which we're still trying to form a consensus on that. Let's bring this back up. Okay, so we have covered the changes to the biggest items that were affecting ArchMage. We've covered the actual debuff to the ArchMage skill itself. The only thing that we really have to look at is the changes to Stormbrand, because they said that was going to get buffed. I've already talked over some of it, but we'll go ahead and look at the actual skill. And we've also covered the Hierophant, the changes to that, which is 1 change. And it winds up being actually a buff, in my opinion. Especially, you could say losing the brand. You could be like, oh, I'm losing a brand. There's so many places we can pick up brands. Because of the change of how they want brands to work now, I honestly don't see that as too big of a downside. So, brand, where are you? Where are you? Where are your changes? I think it's towards the top. Maybe I passed it. Let's see. Where are you, Brand? Okay, I already know what the changes are. I'm gonna keep on looking, but I'll go ahead and talk about them. So the debuff that's happening to all brands is they're gonna be reducing the amount of time that they're going to be lasting. This is something that they said previously. The actual numbers for the Storm brand is they're reducing its life from 10 seconds down to 6. So it's not going to last as long, and that kind of goes along with me saying the having 5, 6, 7, 8 brands is not as big of a deal now, because you're going to be recasting a lot more. And even the question of whether recall is going to be the best way to go, or if it's going to be better off to use new supports and build it kind of in a different way, especially since you're talking about in our ascendancy, we would wind up having more damage in the last life part of the brands, so they're actually going to kind of scale upward. But the recall is something that's still going to be able to be useful. They did have the nerf that was happening to that, which was going to be that at lower levels, it's not going to have as short of a cooldown, so your recall time is going to be diminished. But at the higher levels, it's going to have an equivalent recall time. As I said before, the Storm brand got a buff to its base crit, It went from a 5.5 to a 6% base crit, which, you know, that's slightly under. I mean, it's like a 8, between like 8 to 9% buff to the base crit, which base crit is a pretty big deal if you're trying to scale up to a high critical, a high effective critical strike chance, so that your multiplier becomes a multiplier for your damage. So that is going to be a factor. You know, you hear 0.5, some people might hear 0.5% increase to base critical and be like, that doesn't sound like very much. It is actually quite a bit when you consider like giant buffs are, you know, a 1% to 1.5% increase to your base critical, like the buffs that we get from the influences, say on chests. It is a significant it is a significant buff. Okay, here's our Stormbrand. As I said, base critical up to 6% from 5.5. They said that they were going to buff Stormbrand. They actually lowered the damage, the added damage effectiveness of 30 to 30 from 40. So that's a 25% debuff. But they increase the activation every 0.5 seconds. I've explained to you how activation works, and that's down from 0.6, which, as I've explained, you know, 0.5 is better than 0.6 because, you know, going back to if it's 0.5 every second, it's activating twice. If it was 0.6, you'd be having it activate 1.8 times every second, or approximately. So you kind of get the idea of that. That is a buff, but there's a debuff in here, and this is a debuff. Although it's across the board debuff, I honestly don't feel like them calling this a buff is being very truthful, because we have added damage effectiveness being nerfed by 25%, and then we have a buff to base critical of a little bit less than 10%, and, you know, about like 15 to between 15 to 20% buff to the activation frequency. So I'm not really calling this. They said that they were buffing the Stormbrand. This really is not a buff. I mean, honestly, if anything, this is just a balance. They've kind of just changed the stats around, but it kept its strength overall the same. And that's if we can ignore the fact that the detachment duration has been nerfed. So I would actually say Stormbrand has been nerfed overall. But if we ignore the detachment duration, because they've changed how brands are going to be functioning this league, I would say that it was just balanced. So the only real losses that I would say this has actually gotten, because the Hierophant ascendancy changes have actually made the Hierophant better, especially for what the new season is going to be bringing. The new way that brand builds are actually going to function. I would say this is just balanced. I would say the only debuffs have actually come from the ArchMage support, which I'm going to be truthful with you. The ArchMage support was way too strong. I agree with the nerf of 1/6. I think that combined with the nerfs that they have done to the gear, I agree with it. To give you an idea of how overpowered the ArchMage support was, when I saw that they were bringing out brands, when I looked at the brands, I was literally only looking for things that I could use ArchMage with. Why was that? The ArchMage support was so easy to scale and so powerful the way that it was, that I literally did not see any other damage type as even a viable source of damage. So I literally was like, the winter brand, absolutely not even a choice as a viable build, because I can't use ArchMage support with it. Armageddon brand, cool, you guys reworked it. Absolutely not even even a viable brand, because it's fire damage and I can't use Archmage with it. Just completely not even a factor. Like, not even something I would consider, or even actually, you know, I was gonna mess around with them leveling up. I already told you guys that, but not even worth considering, because there's no way, unless they just made them so overpowered. Like, I'm talking about like the base damage of them being so far beyond the base damage of anything that they've ever put in the game, it's not even viable. Like the Winterfrost, you know, you can attach three brands. Can't use Archmage with it. It's not even worth considering. That is how powerful the Archmage support with the items that you had access to were. Like, it just completely made me just be like nothing that I nothing that I can't use Archmage with is even viable. Plain and simple. Would I have still played around with the stuff? Yes, but not seriously. And anyone who would have presented any other brand as, you know, like a best choice would be flat out either ignorant or just a liar, because they don't know what they're talking about, because that's how powerful the Archmage was. Now with it balanced and there's not these like super cheap ways to scale it, mainly speaking about, you know, the changes to the fevered minds and like these are the biggest ones. Fevered mind, I mean 50% increased um, mana cost for just, you know, a jewel slot. It's just ridiculous. Um, I'm being real. I'm just being real. So the question now is the build dead? Does this, and then, you know, the question for myself or someone that might be wanting to follow what it is I'm doing, is this viable anymore? And I'm going to give you an answer and a demonstration. So you have to keep in mind, first of all, this is the build that I was playing with all of these fevered minds, with all of this stuff previously in there. I have removed all of that stuff. I haven't reallocated my points to, you know, something that would actually work, not having all of this stuff in there. My build is structured solely around scaling through the fevered minds, and I've just removed them. So let's see how it does in a map. If I can find a tab of maps. Here's a tab of maps. All right, I don't want to use my old school ones, but we'll use one of these. Oh, actually, I don't want to use a Nemesis map. Do I have a different one? All right, here we go. So let's see how it goes. Just making sure I'm not using anything. When you're looking at your old tabs and maps, you know, there's just some stuff that you don't want to get away. But I don't want to spend too much time trying to find a viable map. But I mean, as you can see, I don't know. Does this build look like it's been ruined? Does it look like it's no longer viable to you? And I mean, you really have to keep in mind that I basically removed everything from my build that was giving me damage besides just my gem links, which, you know, the build will actually be much stronger. Because I'm obviously going to have my one fevered mind in there. I'm obviously going to be scaling the build differently because, you know, I can't scale it through the same way that I was scaling it. So it's going to... Oh. Those poppy dudes are kind of nasty. I'm not going to rerun it. The point was just to kind of quickly show you the damage that is there with, you know, me having just no fevered minds. I will be able to have one. I have none of the stuff that's being removed. This is going to be, you know, more powerful, but obviously my tree is not set up. You know, I have 6 empty jewel slots. I mean, just if you count those just as points that could have gone into something else or socketing stuff in there, I don't have, you know, even a Watcher's Eye socketed. So, and you're talking about, you know, we have new supports, ways that we can build these that are going to cause, you know, the brands to do more damage in a quicker amount of time, faster activation, frequencies, stuff like that. So my short answer is no. The build was just so... the Archmage was just so overpowered that I agree with the balance changes. But I don't feel... But the build is not the build is not killed. I think it's just more at a balanced level. I will say that this is going to make it so that um, other builds are going to have more viability, and but the ArchMage is still a really strong support. But what makes me still turn to ArchMage is because we have a very good synergy that goes along with this scaling of mana with the Archmage support. It makes it so that with the Hierophant, we're gaining damage reduction, mana for casting our skills, obviously, um, damage, mana for casting skills, mana for damage reduction, and energy shield, all from scaling mana. The other thing that I actually like about these changes, because I see the changes as a balancing. For most people that see these changes, they're just going to be like, oh, build is ruined. I'm not even considering doing that. What does that mean? That means not many people are going to be doing mana builds, which means it's probably going to be really easy for the people who do wind up doing it to pick up gear really cheap. Also, the Fevered Minds. Now, what position is it that I'm in? I'm in a position where I'm only looking for one Fevered Mind. Um, and the popularity of the things that I'm going to be wanting are not going to be as popular. Like, it's probably going to be pretty easy for me to get a Healthy Mind, Cobalt Jewel. It's probably going to be pretty easy for me to get a Fevered Mind. The things are going to be a lot easier to get. The competition is really going to be more just in um, general brand type items. Those there's probably going to be competition for because the major introductions for this league are brands, war cries, slams. Like, that is what the majority of people are going to be playing. But specifically, mana based stuff is not what people are going to be playing because it's not the new thing, and it has taken a lot of nerfs that most people initially are going to look at and be like, ugh, that hurts. This build is dead. That's going to be the assumption of a lot of people, especially because a lot of people were playing the build as a build where the way that they were playing the build was just basically casting these down and then auto recollecting by just walking around, which they won't be able to do now. So the whole function of how they were playing the build is now completely dead. Um, and the way that they were scaling the build is now dead because all the items that they were scaling the damage through is now gone, and the skill itself has taken a nerf. So I think that as a starter, it's going to actually be easier to make the build. So I'm still going to be playing this. I told you guys previously the reasons why I was going it, because it's going to give me a chance to play a whole set of the new skills as I'm leveling up, and then I'm still going to have a viable end target build to go with for the build. So it is still going to be my first build. It's going to end up as an Archmage build. It's going to be very different from the end build that I have here because it's simply not going to be an optimized build anymore because I'm changing how I'm going to be scaling the build. Like, new stuff, new tree, new ascendancy. There's a lot of stuff changing. So the build is going to look very different. There's a few things that'll look the same. Honestly, early I'm probably going to be going for a Voidbringer. I'm going to be going for one Fevered Mind. When I can afford to, or when I have a drop, I'm going to go for 6-link Ivory Tower. I'm going to be going for a Prism Guardian for the eventual low life version of the build. So there's going to be a few things that are going to look the same. I'm going to go for a Healthy Mind when I can afford it, or when I can find it, or when I can roll it. Those are going to be things that are going to be the same, but it's going to give me an opportunity to play new stuff, and I really enjoyed the Archmage build. It is really strong. I think it did need balancing. Just being real. There was a lot more upgrading that I could have done in my build, but it was just so overpowered that I had no reason to. I was doing completing 100% Delirium Guardian maps. I did them after not playing, taking my break, hopping in to finish my challenges to get my wings, and first try on the first one, and then a deathless on the second Guardian, 100% Delirium map. Like, there was no reason for me to upgrade, and there were still a lot more upgrades that I could have gotten for the low life, like a lot more. So, but the build was overpowered. Realistically, I think in the new league, I will be able to create a build with more invested, obviously, because I'm gonna actually have the need to want to actually min max all of my gear. I think I will have a build that is stronger than this one with an ArchMage build. Um, as an end build, obviously more invested because I'm not going to have this really easy path of just add a bunch of fevered minds, scale mana solely, um, and once I get enough, call it a day. The build's going to be more. It's definitely going to have more elements of. I'll be going for near max critical hit chance. And this one I have an effective of 80%, which wasn't a big deal for me in this build because I had so much damage. But in the new build, I'm definitely going to be going for over that 90% mark, which is actually going to probably be a reason why I will probably wind up keeping the Voidbringers, because I'm going to need more. Like in this build, I'm not using Voidbringers, but in the new build, I feel like this is probably going to wind up kind of becoming a requirement for the build, because we're not going to have as easy of a time scaling the mana cost of our skill. So that 80 base mana increase is probably going to be a pretty big deal, and the increased critical strike chance for spells on top of that, because now I'm going to want an increase, a max critical. The Voidbringers could wind up being, something that I actually keep in an endgame build, which normally when I move into an endgame build, I wind up with less and less unique items. In this case, there might be some need for them, but we will see. The the one thing that I will say is, as far as changing off the Hierophant, the big advantage of the Hierophant, this becomes more of a downside because it less cost of mana skills, which I'm using it in this video, the less cost of mana skills. Um, and as far as damage wise, that's obviously a negative. Um, but the advantage of this is it makes it so that I'm able to have the extra auras. I wouldn't be able to have as many auras as I have unless I were to go a lot into reduced mana reservation. The 20% of my maximum mana as maximum energy shield, it's a big difference. You're looking at 7100, 71, 71. Yeah, so I'm losing 4,000, almost 3,000 energy shield, and it makes it so that I can't have on my. Let's make sure it didn't remove my discipline. Otherwise, that would be a. Um, okay, yeah, it removed wrath, so that didn't distort it. I actually lost almost 3,000 energy shield from that. So you're talking about from the 25,000, I do gain a pretty good amount of damage. There's a pretty good amount of damage lost there in the mana cost of the skill, because it's cutting it in half. But the trade of damage for overall defenses, you're talking about losing a little bit less than a quarter of your damage for like over a third of your defenses. So I'm still going to be going for a really well balanced build that's based around mana as my first build. Um, but if you want a build that's going to still have those really high damage numbers, you could go for something else. It's just you're going to have trouble getting that really strong build that has a really nice set of defenses and offenses. The one way that you could wind up with a similar offense defense is going to be, which obviously you could do this anyways. You could go for the mana to energy shield Watcher's Eye, which is going to add a bunch more, which would kind of make you like close to the same range of energy shield between the two things. But you could also use those two things together, and you could wind up having like 11 12,000 energy shield and just be an absolute monster tank level a build, which is probably something that one of these slots will wind up going to for in my new build. Anyways, I hope that this explanation helps you decide whether this is something that you want to do early. As with every season, if you're new to the the channel. Um, Builds that I start, I do progressions on the builds to help people that are following the build. Um, that way, also, if someone decides to pick those builds up, they have a clear way of like, all right, I don't have very much currency right now. What did he do really early league? What worked? So, and then, kind of like a midway point, and then eventually I do like an end game, like min-max version of the build. So if you want something that you're able to follow along with as you're playing, then I suggest following something like this or follow one of my builds that I have covered a lot. The only thing that I tell people with builds that I've covered previously, some stuff does change. Luckily, a lot of the builds that I've covered are not really getting any mechanical changes, um, like major mechanical changes to the skills. Obviously, if you're planning on playing something else, you should definitely check patch notes and make sure that something that you've played with previously isn't receiving major debuffs or reworks. And if they are, you should invest some time into looking at what those changes are, so you don't wind up starting something, getting into it, and then you're like, oh crap. The biggest thing that I would say you need to check in on is the changes to the unique items. There has been a massive amount of changes to unique items. Let me go and bring that up to give you an idea. You should be looking at all these patch notes if you're planning on using specific. Um, so all of this is changes to unique items. This is the listing of all unique item balances, changes that have happened. So there's a lot of changes. I'm not going to go over every single one. In general, it's a lot of like across the board reductions to percentage damage, flat added damage. There is some stuff that's buffed, but in general, there's a lot of debuffing of flat damage, and that's because a lot of the stuff that's gotten reworks or changes is going to be like two-handed weapons. That's really the major thing that they've redone, reworked, and that's because they've added implicits, and supposedly they wanted to do away with making the only viable endgame thing being, one main options being crit multiplier. And the funny thing is they reduced percentage damages and flat damage adds on those weapons. And then what did they do? They, in a lot of the cases, every single one of the category, at least two of the items, they increased the base crit, which I think is kind of funny. The only item base that they actually reduced the crit, the base crit was the Exquisite Blade, and they also reduced its implicit from 60% crit multiplier down to 50. So I don't know why they made that statement. It just makes no sense. And honestly, when they said that in the first place, I was like, that sounds kind of stupid. Like, uh, I mean, I don't have to agree with everything that they do. Overall, I think they do an amazing job on this game, but I think that statement was really stupid. And reading the final patch notes, it doesn't even make sense. I don't know why they had to add that comment in there, because even by the changes that they're making, it makes absolutely no sense. Um, but they can do what they want. In general, overall, it's kind of like I don't agree with them now releasing the final patch notes a few days before the league is launching. Like, I think that's really stupid, but and in fact, I find it pretty annoying, especially since previously they would release a week out, which I want to prepare a build um, closer than a couple days out. And then it sucks when you have a plan, which luckily in this case, my plan isn't actually changing. It's going to have to be modified. And maybe if a week out I had already had these patch notes, maybe I would have planned something else out, which is kind of annoying. Um, but I have a lot of friends that actually test builds beforehand. They actually do, dry runs on builds, like, basically kind of like standard runs where they level up a character so that they make sure that they get a good start. And I think that's really stupid that a lot of people, not stupid on them for practicing because they want a good league start, but I think it's really stupid on the company to basically, ruin all of that effort and time that a lot of players put in. And historically, a lot of my friends do that like the week before the launch. And why is they do that? Because historically, they've given out all the patch notes, a week before the launch date. So yeah, I don't agree with some stuff. You know, they're not perfect, but overall, I like the stuff that they do, so I can't complain too much. But I can share my opinions about things that I dislike. I like most of the stuff, but I dislike some of the stuff. So, anyways, I hope that this is helpful for those of you who are wanting to follow my build or wanted advice about this, or, you know, if this was one of the builds that you really enjoyed and you're super bummed out at first, don't worry. The build's not completely dead. It's just gonna have to change, which, you know, most leagues builds are gonna have to make some adjustments because stuff does change. So if it always stayed the same, it would just create a boring game. So I like the changes. I think that they were warranted, and I look forward to playing the new content. Anyways, thanks for watching. Peace.